hear the new keyboard today? Yay! We decided it was probably the first time we used it in for the choir and worship. Yeah, it's so wonderful. Well, you all know you're made perfectly in God's name, right? So that's what we learned for the first one. But once we've been made, we got a lot still more work to do. And that's where we're focusing on our Luke text for the day. You know, it's hard to work from home, but since the pandemic, that's kind of the new trend, isn't it? Some of you work from home, some of you kind of have gone back to work in places, some of you are retired, and we just don't talk to you because you're retired, and we all have, my brothers, you know, who are all three retired, tend to kind of, you know, put that out there for me all the time. No, it's all good. Well, let me tell you about a young man named Jeff, and Jeff works with IBM, and because of the pandemic, he now gets to work from home. And working from home, though, he, you know, created an office so that he, you know, went to his job, and he thought to himself, though, I need a really good message on my phone in case I'm busy or talking with somebody else. So he was sitting at his office, in his house, and he was trying to record this new message for his phone. But his wife was across the hallway from his office in her bedroom, and she was doing laundry, folding clothes, and she was getting their 6-year-old daughter ready for school. And she had just jumped out of the bathtub, and Jeff was just starting to record his personal message, and it goes like this, male voice, "Hi, this is Jeff Hill with IBM." And then all of a sudden in the background you hear, "Look at you, you have no clothes on." And then the male voice says, "I'm not available right now." Jeff's message maybe didn't quite convey what was happening right now, right? But it kind of brings us to my question of the day about what is the cost of discipleship is, are you available? We always kind of have that, don't we? I'm not available right now, but if you would leave your name, phone number, and a brief message, I'll get back to you right now. Well, sometimes I laugh because when I call my good friend Marcy down in Muscatine at her church, her availability usually means that just at the right moment, and I don't know how I do it, she's somehow stuck in the bathroom. She says, every time I just walk away from my desk and you call me, that's where I am. I said, well, you kind of are available, you're just really busy. Well, maybe that's what happened to poor Jeff, right? But his question of, are you available? Can he talk right now? I don't know. How many of you know who Frederick Buechner is? Have you ever heard that name before? He's a Presbyterian pastor who, for decades and decades, not only was just this wonderful pastor, but he was an author, philosopher, theologist. He really just brought a lot of wonderful gifts to us. And he tells about how his wife's great-grandfather, whose name was George Sin, was a pastor. It was back the way in the 1800s, 1880. And he was summoned one midnight to the bedside of an old woman who lived by herself. She didn't have a lot of money, and she didn't have a lot of friends. And of course, she was a widow. And so there was nobody for her during this time of her illness and dying, that somebody could come and stay with her so that she would have somebody just with her. And so here is Pastor Shin and the town doctor, and they're trying to see if there's somebody who could sit with her in her last days. And so they go into town, like the parable says, and they start knocking on doors. And they threw pebbles at windows, and they were trying to rouse people in town to see if somebody could go help. Well, one woman said she couldn't do it because she had children at home, and you know, she had to get them up in the morning and feed her husband breakfast and all that. She could not go. And one woman just said, I wouldn't know what to do. I mean, what if she got really sick? Well, she was dying, but she was nervous because it would be a crisis. It'd be a difficult situation. Another was the fact that here are two suspicious men roaming around in the middle of the night throwing rocks at women's doors and houses. They wouldn't even open their window to talk to them. But finally, as the memoir of Pastor Reverend Shin puts it, in the prose of another age, they rapped at the humble door of an Irish woman, the mother of a brood of children. And she put her head out of the window and said, "Who's there? And what could you want at this time of night?" And of course, the two men tell of their situation, and her warm Irish heart could not resist. "Will you come?" the men asked. "Sure, and I'll come, and I'll do the best I can." And she did come, and the account ends, she did the best she could. I love that story. I love that the woman was willing, even though she didn't know the other woman, even though it was in the middle of the night, even though she had a brood of children to take care of. Well, maybe that's why she left, for the husband to take care of, right? No, I love that there couldn't be a warmer word in our language than, "I'll be available." It means I'm here when you call on me. I'm ready and willing and able. Our story today is all about how there were these great crowds that were following Jesus. And he turned around to them and says, "Anyone who wants to be my follower must love me far more than he does his own mother, his own father, his own wife, his own children, his brothers or his sisters. Yes, in order to follow me, you would even have to love more than your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple." I think what Jesus says, even though when we read it or when Julie read it, it kind of sounds kind of negative, doesn't it? Well, you can't love the people that are important to you. No, that isn't what Jesus is saying. He's just saying, do you have more love in your heart to love a stranger, to love another? Are you available? Could I count on you when I rap on your door or throw pebbles at your window in the middle of the night? Are you ready to do your part? Because there are plenty of people who are curious, who say, "That's an interesting question, Jesus," and who are generally interested. But there are only a few who will really make themselves available. Are you among that number? And could Jesus count on you? Would you make yourself available? That's the question that I'm asking you this day, because Christ does not ask us to do anything that he himself has not done for us. Are we ready to walk where Jesus has walked? Because when Jesus said that we must love him more than we love our family and friends, we have to remember that the time when Jesus' family came to take him home. He was in the temple and he was in the synagogue and he was preaching and he was teaching, and they kind of were worried that maybe Jesus was kind of thinking a little bit more of himself. But when they tried to take him home, Jesus looked at the crowd and said, "Who is my mother? Who is my brother?" And then he answered his own question, and he pointed back to his disciples, and he said, "Look, these are my mother and brothers." And then he added to that in Matthew 12, "Anyone who obeys the Father in heaven is my brother, my sister, my mother." It wasn't that Jesus didn't care about his family, his mother, or his brothers. Yes, he cared for them, but he could not let his love just for them keep him from doing what God has promised. Do you not think that he was tempted as the shadows of the cross grew darker about him to leave it all, to go back to the security of his hearth and home in Nazareth? Of course he was. He was scared, but he knew he had a higher calling and that he could not let his love for his immediate family ever stand in the way. It is a choice that courageous people sometimes have to make. I think about those people in the world that do dangerous jobs. I think about our people who are in the military and go overseas and have gone overseas and fought in wars, and how some didn't come back. I think about all those emergency crews, and especially as you know, today is September 7th, what of course is happening this week, a remembrance of 9/11. Of those firemen and police officers and emergency ambulance crews, all those people who ran into the buildings and the Twin Towers or into the plane accident and didn't think twice because they knew they had a greater purpose. You know, there are people who risk their lives every day in situations like that, who make themselves available. And sometimes that just pauses me. Pauses me because I don't know if I could do that myself. I've done some crazy things in my time, like try to rescue an owl on the side of the road, but I really wasn't in danger. It was maybe a little dangerous and really more stupid than anything. But who can we think of that really has self-sacrificed? Well, let me tell you a story about something that happens in Cherokee, North Carolina every summer. How many of you have ever gone there and seen the big dramatic outdoor play called Unto These Hills? Yeah, some of you have. It is America's most popular outdoor drama that tells this thrilling story of Sala, a Cherokee Indian brave. You see, in 1838, 17,000 Cherokee Indians were forced by General Winfield Scott to journey en masse in awful conditions from western North Carolina to Oklahoma. More than 4,000 of those Cherokee Indians perished on that terrible Trail of Tears. We've heard of that, haven't we? But there were about 1,000 of those Native Americans, however, that stayed, but hid out in the Great Smoky Mountains, and one of them was Solly. Solly's wife had been unfortunately murdered by a drunken United States soldier, who then, in turn, was killed by Chief Sala and his kinsmen. And consequently, Sala escaped into the depths of America's largest virgin forest. And eventually, though, a trusted friend of Sala's transmitted of General Scott's promise to bring justice to those military men. He asked and said this statement: if Sala and his kin would surrender to the shot, the remainder of the 1,000 tribe could stay in the beautiful land of their birth. They could stay in North Carolina. So after the days of anguish, Sala and his sons and brother-in-law walked unescorted into a nearby town to face death. What brought him? Well, white soldiers never could have found him in the cave near Clingman's Dome in the Smokies. And despite a burning desire to live and love for his people, instead he chose to die for them. And at the last moment, even his youngest son was saved from the firing squad by the tears of a missionary woman. But no luck for Sala. The rifles rang out and 3 men died, but 1,000 Cherokees were free to remain in the Great Smoky Mountains. And from that came the great story and telling of Sala as a prophet, because he made himself available for his people. You know, the Gospel of John says, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends." You know, sometimes we are compelled by a greater love than that for our mothers and brothers and spouses, in the same way that Saul gave up his life for his people. Christ, my friends, gave his life for you and me. He asks us to do more than he has already done, but I know we hesitate because we say we are no Jesus. But he still asks us, are you available to walk in his footsteps? Are you available to suffer the possible consequences of discipleship? You know, Jesus in this today passage says, "No one can be my disciple who does not carry his own cross and follow me." You know, that's a tough thing to hear. What are we willing to sacrifice in order to give God glory? You know, we usually are a people that are not too willing to make sacrifices. Oh, we'll make them for our families. We'll make them maybe even for our friends. But for strangers or those marginalized and on the outskirts, the stranger that we do not know, we tend to just be a little bit more hesitant because maybe we are not as in love with people as Jesus was. You know, we just aren't comfortable thinking that we might sacrifice something that we don't know if we would get anything in return. And because we live comfortable lives, drive comfortable automobiles, have comfortable homes, even maybe comfortable churches that don't nudge us too often to get involved, it doesn't concern you that at times we have chosen the wide gate to go through and not the narrow one? Have we chosen an easy road and not the road that leads to life? It's one of those sermons where I do leave you with the question of, what are you willing to do for your faith in God and Jesus Christ? Will you make yourself available? It takes courage to be available. It takes compassion. It takes commitment. And are you willing to walk in Christ's steps? Are you willing to be like the lovely Irish woman in my beginning story, who says, yes, I'm available. And it means I am here when you call on me. I will be ready and willing and able. Amen. Amen.